Hello, everyone. It's nice for you to be with us tonight. We just saw each other all a lot last week. I thought it was pretty good. It's pretty fun. My favorite part was, a couple of times afterwards, talking with people was it was kind of cool to be able to do that. Um, so Zoom is a neat thing. I'm actually taking a class. It's free. Well, it wasn't free, but it's not a college credit class with Brad Jerzak. Some of you are familiar with him, and a few other people. They're going through the book of John. So I just jumped in. Today's the first time I listened. Uh, it's pretty good stuff. And it was over Zoom too. So Zoom is taking over everything, thankfully. So tonight, we're going to be continuing on with cruciform faith. This will be the fifth one. And tonight we're going to be talking about the cross and cruciform faith, or starting to get into it at least. And I'm going to mix things up a little bit, just because I'm also looking at other things and doing some other studies, and I thought that some of them kind of blended well together. So we're not going to do it as a break from one and look at the other. We're just going to mix them together because I think they definitely go together. So tonight, I titled it "The Cross, the Shema, and the Condition of Humanity." So before we start, let's have a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for all these folks that could be here tonight, and thank you that they are interested in your word and things that we could learn. Pray, Lord, as always, that people would take things that we're talking about, look at them themselves as deep as they want to or as light as they want to. Lord, see what you have for them, because you have things for us. I think it's important that we understand that, and that your spirit is at work in us as believers, and that we need to be open to the things that we're hearing, and the things that we read, not just in scripture, but in books and things by people who have taken the time, because that's how we grow. And I pray that this will be a blessing tonight. Amen. So it's been a couple of weeks since we talked about this, because we had the conference in between, and I don't know if you remember what we talked about last time. And I can't see anybody but myself, so if you're nodding, I can't tell. But the fundamental option is what we talked about last time. And the fundamental option, just in a couple sentences, is our right posturing, or our right ordering, or orientation before God, and that's kind of where we left it last time. And we discussed that it was something that was used in Roman Catholicism theology, and some other folks have been using it also recently, or at least in the past 15 or 20 years, that aren't Roman Catholic, and they've been kind of using it as a way to describe our stance before God. We also went back and briefly looked at some of the examples we found with Israel, and talked about the importance of us exercising the fundamental option, versus not. So it's, we left it as I said, with us towards God, but there is more to it than that. And tonight, that's what we're going to kind of get into. So when we are oriented towards God, we talked about last time, we will act in the world, and that, as we talked about also, is faith. Faith, if you remember, in the Bible, the English word, it kind of narrows down what it really means. In the Greek, it has a wider option of meanings, and one of those meanings, and the core meaning that we found is frequent in the scriptures, is that faith is action. Faith is not just belief. And so it's very important that we are oriented towards God, because when we are, that's when we act. When we're not, it's when we don't act. At least act in the way that we should be towards him and towards others. So it's not just belief. So tonight, like I said, we're going to mix things up a little bit, and I can't. It's not that I can't look at one thing, but I have so many things to look at. Um, I have other people showing me things. Giving me some good stuff to look at. So I have been. Plus, I find a lot on my own. You call them rabbit trails, maybe, from other things. You might think some of this is coincidence, but I don't know. Maybe it is. But we're going to talk about something called the Shema. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's Hebrew. So it would be SHM, because there's no vowels in Hebrew, but it looks like, to me, the pronunciation is Shema. So that's how I'm going to say it. Shema means hear. Recently, we talked, looking in the book of Revelation, we talked again about the boxes that they wore. And because I didn't know the word Shema at that time, I didn't use it, but that's actually what was written in the box, or written on their doorpost, or signs, or wherever else in their house that they reviewed with their children from a very young age. And the Shema is something that we find not just in the Old Testament, but it's also in the New Testament. And it strongly, to me, relates to our topic of cruciform faith, because Shema is kind of it's kind of a way to describe what your orientation is towards God. So Jesus uses the Shema. Paul uses the Shema. First John uses it. It's throughout the scriptures from the first time we read it. And the first time we read it is in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 9. I just clicked too far. It says, "Hear, O Israel," and here, right there, that's Shema. "The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign, fix them on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your gates." And the Shema is the Lord, our God, is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. That is what the Shema is. Now, when I looked at this before, I said there might be other things they put in the box and wrote down, and that was possible. But the main idea is for them to understand that they're God's and God is theirs, and there is nobody else. And they need to love him and no other gods or other things going on. So Yahweh is one. Love him with all your heart, soul, mind. We know the guy in the New Testament says all your strength, basically with all your being. So it is taught, the Shema is taught as the way to live accordingly. If they lived by it, it would bring blessings to the nation. It could bring blessings to the individual. If they did not do the Shema, not quote it, but if they didn't actually live it, then it could go poorly for them in the form later in Deuteronomies of curses. Now, most of these curses aren't necessarily things that God would even have to bring about himself. There were things that, should he decide to move away from them a little bit or turn his face, which we've read in the Old Testament happen, then other things would take over, and basically life would happen to them. And so, unfortunately for them, they lived in a very cutthroat world, And in that world, nations were on each other's doorsteps, constantly battling each other. It was tough. There were nations, like the Philistines. They had their own land, but that wasn't enough, and they would go into other people's lands and harass them and steal their livestock and their agriculture and things like that, which we know from reading Judges. So for them not to be rightly ordered towards God resulted in these things. And of course, we know what happened. As soon as those happened, they got themselves rightly ordered towards God. So eventually we know that Israel, they didn't keep the Shema, and eventually they paid for that with their permanent removal by the Romans. So leading up to this fall to Rome, during his ministry on earth, Jesus was asked a question about the Shema. And I not knowing this information that I've learned now, I didn't think about it quite as deeply as maybe I should have, or look it up. But Jesus was asked about it. So basically what he was being asked was, do you know the Shema? And they were kind of asking him, they kind of wanted to see, well, what's he going to say? How is he going to say this? And so if Jesus, being a young Jewish man born to two devout Jewish people, because we know he attended the festivals and saw sacrifices, and if he was raised like the average young man, then he would have known the Shema. In fact, it might have been put on their doorpost. Maybe not. Maybe somewhere in the house they had something with it on it. I don't know if Joseph ever wore the little box, or if Jesus did with it in it. But either way, he knew it, and he would have known it by heart. And obviously we know at this point Jesus is in ministry, so he knows who his father is, so he definitely knows the Shema. But that's not the viewpoint of the person asking. So Jesus, he answers, and we're going to read that, and we're going to get it from Mark chapter 12, verses 29 to 34. Tonight, mostly I'll be from the NRSV, so you can just listen if you want, or if you could turn fast enough, you can get there. Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor. There is no other commandment greater than these. Then the scribe said to him, you are right, teacher. You have truly said he is one, and besides him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart and all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far off from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to ask him any question, at least at that point, right? So loving your neighbor would not be something new to the scribe. It wouldn't be something new to any Jewish person of the time, because it was part of the law. However, it wasn't part of the Shema. So Leviticus 19:18 says that you can't have any grudges. This is not verbatim, but you can't have grudges, and that you need to love your neighbor as yourself. But it wasn't part of the Hear, O Israel statement. The Hear, O Israel statement was to love God with all of your being, and that God is one, the Lord your God. That was the Shema. So Jesus is adding to something here. And what's interesting to me now, after I learned that, is that the scribe agrees with Jesus and recites it back. So even though it's different than what the scribe was, different than what might be traditional, he agrees and still recites the part about loving your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus is stating that the Shema at this point it's basically a path to spiritual formation. It's spiritually formatting yourself to God and being rightly ordered to God, as we're looking at cruciform living, but also you do the same thing to your neighbor. So when he says, when Paul says it, I didn't reference to Paul, but when Paul says it, he says the second one's like the first. So that means that it's just like the first. So you treat your neighbor exactly like you're going to treat God. And I think that's a really important way to see this. But Jesus at this point is done, but he's not done mixing up with the Shema. So in Matthew 8:21-22, it says, another of his disciples said to him, of course, people are wanting to know how they get to the kingdom, and they want to follow him, and there's, of course, different reasons why they can't. And he says, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, follow me and let the dead bury their dead. So in this, I've always thought this to be really harsh, personally. I've brought it up before, but I thought, well, no Jewish scholars have stepped in to help me or pointed me to the right direction. So, however, what I learned was that the burial custom in ancient Israel could take up to a year. And the reason is because the man or the person, the deceased person, of course, would be buried after a ceremony, but they would be buried almost right away. And they had a period, there's a name attached to it, I can't remember what it is, but they had a small period of mourning, or it could be a prolonged period of mourning, depending on the person, but they had a period of mourning, and once that mourning was over, they went about life as normal, and they waited for the body to decompose. Once the body decomposed, then they would go back into the grave, and they would take the bones and put them in an ossuary or ossuary. And after this, they would rebury it. That would be the final burying. So it was a very long custom. So this man, if he had, it was suggested that he probably had buried his father some time ago, because if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been there asking Jesus anything, and he would have been in the mourning period and would have been with his family. So most likely that's all been over for a while, and he's back out in society, and what he's waiting for is for his father to decompose so he can put the bones in the ossuary. Now, that's not to say that's not important, and it's not an important tradition, and it mean something to the Jewish family. But I think what Jesus is saying is, hey, the kingdom is now. The time to follow me is right now. And that's what he meant by follow him, or, follow me. And so maybe not as harsh as I thought before. Still might be a little harsh, but Jesus is making a point here. And his point is that now is the time to follow, and you're following me. So Jesus here, it's been suggested, is this is a time where he's adding on. So we have, now it's follow me. You're following me, Jesus, to get to the kingdom of God. To get to the Father, you're following me. And follow me means drop it and follow me. If you're in, you're in. Get in and be all in. And so this kind of adds on to the fact. So now you're loving the Lord your God as one, and you're loving him, and you're loving your neighbor or others just like you love God. And the way to get to God is to follow Jesus. And so these things that Jesus is bringing out, although shortly over time, has to be, it has to mean something to the people that were listening to him. because he's going completely in this against what tradition would say. Um, he's not that loving your neighbor isn't tradition, because they're told to love their neighbors. Of course, we know that they didn't love hardly any of their neighbors if you read things in the Old Testament. But uh, it, what it is it's him saying it's more than loving God. It's also loving your neighbor the same way you love God. And it's more than that. To get to God, to have a relationship with him, you're going to have to come through me. And so this becomes a kind of a new spiritual formation, if you will, of what is being expected of folks. And, this is, if you put it in context of the whole frame of mind of what's happening here, there's time is short. Jesus has prophesied to say what's about to happen to Israel. And so all this it's kind of it's the urgency that he's bringing out. Follow me, follow me, follow me, because this is the time, and this is how we do it, and this is how you're going to do it. And of course, we know he goes to the cross, and that really is the capstone of it all. But leading up to that, you can see. I mean, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast, and the guy said, he always cringes when he hears people say, well, Jesus gave the gospel. And some people say, no, he didn't. He couldn't have given the gospel because the cross hadn't happened yet. Well, that's true. But, there was a gospel of the kingdom, because we know that the gospel is different and comes in different forms. And so that's what he was doing. He was preaching a gospel and trying to pull people in and get them to understand what they were. So this becomes a key piece of the Shema. And so why do I bring out the Shema? Because I feel that the Shema is hand in hand with cruciform faith. So cruciform faith should have some effect on how we're living today, right now. And it's all centered around God, who is our Father. As Paul would say, or Jesus would say, Abba. He is our Father in the most closest familial term. Again, I think I mentioned this last time, a couple of weeks ago. When we say Father, we think it's more formal. Abba is not as formal. Abba is a more, the guy you run up to and give a big hug, the guy who takes you fishing. You get in trouble and you go home, and you get in trouble by him, but then there's that connection of love, and that's who God is to us. So the Shema was a prayer, or something written on someone's doorpost, or a box that they wore around their forehead or hand. But first and foremost, it should have been written on their hearts. And that's what God was looking for. Is Abba, is God written on your heart? Is he always on your mind? Is he the first thing you think about when you get up in the morning? And is he the last thing you think about when you go to bed? Is he the first person you think about when you start talking to someone else, or you're in a taxing situation? What do you think of? This was what the Shema was for. It was to mentally remind people, or order them to say, hey, stop for a minute. This is who I am. This is what I'm supposed to be. And so I think it's kind of applicable. I mean, I guess you could say technically, yeah, but that's, that's in the law, or that's the Old Covenant or the Old Testament. But I don't think really that's a good way to look at it. And, part of it is God is not, he's not a mysterious being, or a mysterious king on some unseen heavenly throne, though he is unseen. but he's personal, and that's what the Shema. For Israel, when they had the Shema, it was about, you can't worship any other gods. You have all these A, B, C, D, 600 and some laws that you have to follow, and there was something more behind it than it was. Eventually, God wanted that relationship with them, as God brings out in the prophets. But initially on, you have to think of how they reacted when they got the first tablets, and things they did, and the things that happened to them, and the things that God had already done with them. Up to this point, it's, you can almost think of it as fear-based, although we say it's fear is awe, but they're looking up at a mountain and seeing fire and black billowing smoke, and they're feeling the mountain rumble, and Moses is coming down, and his face is shining so bright because he's been up there with God, and see all these things. He's wandering in front of them during the daytime in a giant pillar of cloud, and at night a big ball of fire. I mean, you see those things, you think of maybe this might be a little offhanded, but you think of the Wizard of Oz, right? The great and powerful Oz, but when you pull back the curtain, it was a small, timid man. Of course, God is not a small, timid man, but it's just that idea of, so the Shema now can be thought of, and when Jesus was saying it, he's trying to say it's different than you thought it was before. It means something different. And one person I was reading suggested that we, as believers today, do what we can to remember the Shema, whether you recite it or use it in a prayer, or whatever your routines are in the morning and at night, and even throughout the day. But it can certainly apply. And I decided, well, what if I was to use the Shema? How would I say it? Probably different than they said it, but the same idea. But using the Father as someone closer to me than the mysterious God. And of course, we can add in there that he gave himself selflessly through his son Jesus on the cross. We can add in that he dwelled fully within his son, so that he was with him through all the suffering, and he loved us enough to go through that. And so Jesus, in the same way, offered himself. And so shouldn't we do the same? And if we feel like I need to do the same back to God, then when we see where Jesus adds in the part about the neighbor, that's what he's saying. He's saying, as much as you love God is the same that you need to love your neighbor. And that's, that makes it, to me, more of a relational topic than I need to fear God because he's God. And so it's important. If you think about it, the whole topic from, we'll say even from Jesus on, from that point on through the rest of the New Testament, you read it often. A few weeks ago, I in a magazine, I read a little article about First John, and someone was saying how a lot of pastors, I don't know if this is true, but will not frequently preach out of First John because they feel like John just says basically love, 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 love. And really that's the key. That's what it is. That's what the Shema is about. So I thought it was interesting. In one book I read, they had a quote by Rick Warren, not necessarily someone I would read often, but he says, life minus love equals 0. So the Shema it's basically telling us this is what life is about. It's about loving God. It's about loving others just like you love God. So the hope would be that people love God the way they should, so they treat their neighbors the way they should. If not, then that's another issue for them to figure out. But So the second point I have is called a crushing victory. So I ask, why is this so hard for us to do? Because it's really hard for us to do. Often, there's some situations where it's easier than others. Some situations we find it very easy to love someone like we might love God. Other times, if we don't love someone the way we love God, it might want to make us. It should, at least it will be for me from now on. It should make me pause and say, why am I treating this person like this? Because this is not how I would treat God. If I was standing before God right now, how would I be treating him? That's how I should be treating this person. I mean, again, easier said than done. But that's the expectation that Jesus is putting out. That's the expectation that God has from us. So, some people might say that it's hard because of things in the world. Some might say, well, it's hard because of Satan, or the god of this world, or because we live in a present evil age. There's so much around us. I mean, there's Christian self-help books, songs. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can read or hear that people use as a reason. But I think it hits a lot closer to home, because the cross, according to Paul, has taken care of most of this. The things that we complain about as Christians, things that make it harder, take away. So Jesus Christ crucified has crushed every enemy that we needed to overcome, every enemy to love, to realize a life of cruciform faith. And when I mean crushed, I mean crushed. He was absolutely victorious. In Colossians 2:13-15, it says, and when you were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive together with him when he forgave us all of our trespasses, erasing the record that stood against us with its legal demands. He set this aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in it. Now, we've talked about this verse before. I have and other people have, and whether it's about just heavenly beings or earthly beings, personally, I think it's both. Different systems that this was over, but it's done. It's gone. So there's nothing that any system, any being that can over you with any meaning. Of course, they can say things and try to hold you account to things that don't matter or that God doesn't look at anymore. But it's all nailed to the cross, and it went to the grave, and it didn't come back out of the grave. It stayed. So it's done. So what do people mean when they say things that there are rulers and authorities, rulers of this age, things in the air, and they're pulling me away from God? Because they're not. They're not pulling you away from God. It's easy to read that the rulers were disarmed, and it's easy to gloss over uncircumcision of your flesh. But that statement is very important in this passage, because we've been talking about this. We talked about it pretty in depth a while ago, but you have a nature, and part of that nature is broken, and God through the cross has cut that away from you. So it's gone. It was a victory. It's going to be a victory. It was a victory. So you need to set your mind to it. Of course, again, it sounds really easy, and it's not as easy as it sounds, but the cross made it so. So there is no power anywhere in this world that says, you can't say it made me do it, because it doesn't make you do it. You have a choice as an individual who is a follower of Christ. what you're going to do. So he has cleared the way to make cruciform faith or actions possible for us. Paul believed that humanity, and I'm going to quote this, was under the power of interlock.
So he had his laptop downstairs. It ran out of power just now, and so he's rebooting it. He'll be right with us.
Why don't you?
Why don't I fill in the gap?
Go ahead.
You know, as long as you're here. Dan made the statement, faith is action, not just belief. And it's kind of ironic that my introduction this week to my 11 o'clock message is that faith is action, and the action is always love. So whenever faith is manifested, it's always in love. And if there's no love, there's no faith, because we're following Paul as he imitated, we're imitating Paul as he imitated Christ, and everything Christ did, he did in love. And so that's kind of what Dan is talking about here tonight, you know, with the Lord Jesus Christ, and giving us the verses here in Mark and Matthew. So it's kind of exciting to me that you think that way, you know, in love.
So I think I was at the cross, and the cross is a huge victory for us, and it takes away, it took away everything that could be, and I think I left off at a quote that Paul viewed humanity as under the power of an interlocking directorate of anti-human and anti-God realities and forces. That sounds like a directorate. It sounds like it's out of a movie or something, but that's what it was. You know, I'm not going to go through all these verses, but he has the forces are named sin, death, the world, or as we say, the system, this present evil age, idols, cosmic powers, Satan, and the other angelic hosts that people think are a power against them, and of course the flesh. And you know, you can find verses where he talks about all these things separately, but that's what the interlocking directorate was. All those things were working against humanity to be able to have the right relationship, or to be rightly ordered towards God, towards the Father. And so what Paul is saying is, as you read Paul, that this is all gone. It's been taken care of by the cross, and so therefore we are to live like they are gone. And you know, to me, I think they are gone completely. The only thing that hinders me with a relationship with God, you know, which we're looking at cruciformity. So the word is to be disordered, but it would be chaotic or dysfunctional. What causes dysfunction between God and man, or between men and men? It's the lack of Shema. And we might think, well, that's kind of hokey using the word Shema, but that's what it is. You are not rightly ordered towards God, and you're not rightly ordered towards your neighbor or your fellow man. So you're in disorder, in dysfunction. The relationships are dysfunctional. And that's what the Shema is designed to do by God. And of course, we saw added to on by Jesus. And then Jesus saying the way to get to God is through me. And of course, eventually the cross bears that out. But that is the disordering, and that's the purpose of what the Shema is for, is to remind folks that in order to have the right to be rightly oriented towards God, or the right posture towards God, that's what you need. So as Paul lays it out, you know, humanity was on a path. You think of it as, well, people were stuck in a rut, and honestly, it seems to me it was more than a rut. Today I thought, well, the only better way I could put it would be a canyon, because humanity was deep in it, far from God and where they're to be. Now, after the cross, it's a different story. The cross to Paul, and of course this is quotations also, or loosely quoted, is a liberating apocalyptic event that would completely change the course of humanity. It led us out of the canyon onto flat ground. And, when I thought of that analogy to myself as far as a canyon, and it instantly comes to my mind is, isn't there some place in the Old Testament where everything's made flat? So, of course, I looked it up. And Isaiah 40, and this is, I know it's not the context, but just bear me out as for illustration purposes. We are in, man is in a state where they can't see God. It takes a lot to have to see God. And of course, they had the law in the Jewish system, and the Gentiles had to go through the Jews and all that, and it's just it seems that there was so many mountains or things in the way to finally see him. And so eventually in Isaiah 40, when God is talking about how he's going to redeem Israel and bring them back to the land and all that, he says he's going to take the mountains and the valleys. The valleys are going to come up and the mountains are going to go down. And, that's not literal. As some might say, in Israel, the mountains are all there's going to be earthquakes and they're all going to be flattened out and all this stuff. That's, I really don't think that's going to happen. I think what it is exactly what we just said. It's, I'm going to take away everything that is keeping you from me. And I'm going to flatten it all. And what you're going to see on this big plain is the cross. You're going to see my son, and you're going to see me in that. And there is nothing that's going to be in the way of that. So what power then stops us from that? And I think the answer is it's kind of simple in a way. It's us. It's the self. The self is one of the things I didn't mention when I went through the list of Paul of his interlocking directorate of evil. The self is one of the things that he talks about. And the reason that the self is still the thing that's there is because you can't look at the broken human nature as, one thing was ripped out and everything else is new without it. It's as the word says, human nature. You are a human. So part of your nature is broken. And just hear me out as I close up here. But in Philippians 3:3, it says, "For it is we who are the circumcision, who worship in the Spirit of God and boast in Christ Jesus and have no confidence in the flesh." And Paul says flesh here. He's got a couple different meanings behind this. We have the sarx, like we talked about before, but we also have the law, as in, I have to do things through my nature, through my flesh, through a law, through festivals, through sacrifices, all these other things I have to do in order to get myself closer to God. That's all gone. So there is no, as Mr. Gorman calls it, covenantal dysfunction. That's all been erased. So it's no longer a problem. So the thing is that even though the broken part's been cut away and what's left is new, it's still part of us. So that's what the struggle becomes. It's not that the cross didn't defeat that, because it did defeat it, but it's still kind of attached to you. You're still dragging it along with you everywhere you go. So that's the hardest piece for us. It's ourselves. There is nothing else. All external entities that kept us away from Shema, if you will, from right orientation, are gone. Even the broken human nature has been cut away. So how does it happen if it's been cut away that it still is a factor? Because, Paul says I'm a new creation, right? I mean, if I'm new, then what's the problem? And I think with that comes in, what does the word new mean? So there's two primary words that new uses, that the Greek uses in the New Testament for the word new. One of them is new in time. The other is new in quality. And this word here is the one that we have for the word new in quality. And what that means is it means it's not brand new. It's what was there. It would be like if you have an old car and it's sitting in your driveway for months because you're waiting on a new part. You know, you've cleaned up the car, you've shined it. Say it's a an old car that you're in love with that you bought 50 years ago, and it's a classic, but it hasn't been on the road for so long, and it sat through the winter and it got dirty, and you've polished it and shined it and cleaned it. Now you rip off this old part and you put in a new one. Now your vehicle has become like new in quality again. It hasn't become a new vehicle. You have repaired the vehicle until it's like new. That's what new creation is. So when Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:17 that we're new, it's not that he's thrown out the old completely and inserted a complete brand new person. You're still you. It's just that the old part of you has been taken out. And, a couple translations work into this really nicely. One is Kenneth Woost. He says that you're a creation. He is a creation new in quality. And then at the end of the verse, behold, all things have become new in quality. That's really important to understand that. Jonathan Mitchell says, consider new things have come into existence or have been birthed. It has become new things, or he has birthed and now exist, being ones of a different kind of character and quality. And he cross references to Revelation 21:5, which I think is really neat because in that verse, it says, behold, I am making all things new. And you read that and you think, well, he's making all brand new things. But again, it's the Greek word says, consider this, I am presently making all things of new quality. So he's taking the things that existed and he's imparting on them a new quality that was lacking or missing. In fact, it used to be there at one time, and it's been buried under muck and grime of broken human nature because of Adam, because Adam had that quality. Even with him, the quality was being made newer and newer and newer. He left it behind for his own self. It was his self that caused what happened to happen. Him and Eve, that was their selves. They saw something and decided that they wanted it. We can say, well, the snake or the serpent or Satan or whatever you might believe was there in the garden and he's the one who made it happen. No, not really. What made it happen was their own thoughts, because they had a comparison. They had who God was, and they had who this other was, and what he was saying they could be, and they made the choice. And we could say after that all kinds of things happened in history, and that caused people to wander away, and that's why God says he's taking all the mountains out and the valleys out and making it flat. He's taking it all out. It's you and God. And that's how I felt. The Shema felt kind of blended in nicely with talking about cruciform faith, because tonight we were going to be talking about what humanity became and the things that were stopping them, and what the cross did for us. So I think when you find things like the Shema in Scripture, and you kind of understand the background, and understand what Jesus was trying to get across in adding to it, and then take it as in the whole picture of what the cross accomplished, it means more. At least it means more to me. And you know, as the suggestion was in one book I read that you recited or whatever, I don't know if I would go far as, you know, repetitious reciting of things, but it definitely something to bear in mind that can help us greatly as we continue looking at cruciform faith. So I measured it. We lost a total of 7 minutes, and I only went over 2 minutes. So not too bad. So hopefully in the meantime, you, for 7 minutes, found some good things to talk about. And that's all I got for you until next week.